The laughter was cruel, echoing through the mirrored walls as 3 drunk men closed in on her, their hands brushing where they had no right. The music was still playing, but every beat felt like a hammer in her chest. The students who remained stood frozen, some with phones halfway raised, unsure whether to intervene. She swallowed the heat of humiliation, forcing herself to stay still for now. Her name was Alyssa Grant, 28 years old, a dance instructor who had built this studio from the ground up in the heart of Brooklyn. It wasn't just a job to her, it was her sanctuary, the one place where the rhythm of the floor could drown out every other hardship she'd endured. But tonight, that sanctuary had been invaded. It started with a harmless open class, a Friday night freestyle for anyone who wanted to try. The 3 men, Tommy, Vince, and Kyle, had stumbled in smelling of cheap whiskey and trouble. At first, she thought they were just another trio of rowdy latecomers who would either participate badly or leave early. But after the first set, they started making comments, slurred jokes about her tight little instructor moves, and how she should teach a private lesson. She ignored them, focusing on her students. That only seemed to embolden them. During a pause between tracks, they sauntered closer, invading her personal space. Vince reached out and touched her hip without warning. "Come on, show us some of those moves up close," he said, grinning, with the loose-mouthed confidence of a man who thought the world belonged to him. Tommy chuckled and added, "Bet you can bend better than you teach." Kyle, the tallest, just smirked, his eyes scanning her body with a predator's patience. The humiliation burned hot under her skin, but she refused to flinch. Her heart pounded, her fists tightening at her sides. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head, a man who'd taught her how to defend herself when she was a teenager after a similar incident at a subway station. Never swing first when the crowd isn't on your side. Make sure they write the ending you want. So she smiled thinly and stepped back, pretending to brush it off. "This is a dance class," she said evenly. "Not whatever you think it is." They laughed, the sound dripping with mockery, and strutted back to their corner. But they weren't done. The rest of the class was tense, the other students sensing the shift in the room. Alyssa moved like clockwork, teaching the steps. But her mind was already racing, not about escape, but about payback. She knew their type. They thrived on attention and the assumption that no one would call them out. But what if the tables turned in front of an audience too big for them to laugh it off? As the class ended, she kept her expression neutral, but inside, she was locking the moment in her memory. Every word, every smirk, every unwanted touch, fuel for what was coming. They left without paying, laughing loudly as they pushed the studio door open. Alyssa turned off the speakers and stood in the quiet, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her jaw tightened, her pulse steadying into something colder, sharper. The next time they walked through her doors, it wouldn't be her on the defensive. The subway ride home was a blur of screeching wheels and flickering lights. Alyssa sat still, hands folded on her lap, but her mind replayed every detail, the reek of whiskey on their breath, the weight of Vince's palm on her hip, the way the other 2 laughed like it was a joke they'd told 1,000 times. She'd seen men like them before, always confident, always sure that a woman would just take it, shrug it off, or slink away. Not this time. When she reached her small apartment in Crown Heights, she didn't kick off her shoes or collapse on the couch. She dropped her bag on the table, rolled her shoulders back, and opened the old wooden trunk tucked against the wall. Inside was her father's legacy, a pair of worn kick pads, a fraying jump rope, and the black belt she'd earned before she was old enough to drive. She'd let her martial arts training slip over the years, swapping sparring drills for dance rehearsals, but the discipline was still there waiting under the surface. She wrapped her hands in cloth, stood in the center of her living room, and began moving. The air cracked with the sharp snap of her kicks, the quiet thud of her footwork. Sweat rolled down her spine. Every strike had a name. Tommy, Vince, Kyle burned into her mind like a target. She wasn't just getting back into shape. She was preparing to make a statement. The next morning, she called her friend Marcus, a local event promoter who owed her a favor. "I want a special showcase next Friday at the studio," she said. "Open floor, big crowd. Maybe even live stream it." Marcus raised a brow on the other end of the line. "You planning to make a splash?" She let a small smile curve her lips. "Something like that." The plan was simple: lure them back. Drunk or sober, men like them couldn't resist the chance to show off, especially if there was an audience. She had no illusions they'd try something again. And when they did, she would be ready. For the rest of the week, her schedule was relentless. Mornings were for strength training, lunges, squats, core work, while evenings were split between teaching her regular classes and rehearsing counter moves alone after hours. She practiced the leg sweep until it was second nature, flowing out of a dance step so smoothly it looked choreographed. But her preparation wasn't just physical. She also reached out to a few trusted students, quietly letting them know she was planning something and asking them to bring friends who could film from different angles. If things went down the way she expected, she wanted it documented. By Thursday night, the studio gleamed mirrors, spotless floor waxed. She even had Marcus set up a small banner, "Brooklyn Dance Open Challenge. Show your best moves." The words were bait, bright and harmless, but the hook was buried deep. She stood alone in the middle of the room when the lights dimmed, hands on her hips, and pictured their faces again. The anger was still there, but it was cool now, sharpened into focus. This wasn't about losing control. It was about taking it back. Tomorrow night, the music would play, the crowd would cheer, and the moment they stepped over the line, she'd make sure they hit the floor harder than they'd ever hit a bottle. Friday night came with a chill in the air, the kind that made the city's neon signs seem sharper against the dark. By 7 o'clock, Brooklyn Dance Studio was packed. Students, friends, strangers, and even a few local influencers who'd caught wind of the open challenge. Music pulsed from the speaker's bass, vibrating through the polished floor. Laughter and chatter filled the air, the kind of buzz that made people forget they had anywhere else to be. Alyssa moved among the crowd like a host at her own party, greeting familiar faces, welcoming newcomers. Her hair was pulled into a sleek, high ponytail, her fitted black tank and loose cargo pants giving her the perfect blend of movement and authority. She wasn't just dressed to dance, she was dressed to win. Marcus gave her a nod from the DJ booth. "They're here." She didn't have to ask who. The door swung open, and in walked Tommy, Vince, and Kyle, sober enough to stand straight, but already carrying the swagger of men who thought the night belonged to them. Tommy's leather jacket looked like it hadn't been cleaned since 2015. Vince wore a baseball cap backward, a smirk already plastered across his face. Kyle loomed behind them, tall and silent, scanning the room like a bouncer who thought he owned the place. Alyssa met their eyes for half a second, offered a polite nod, then turned away as if they were nothing more than 3 more participants. That flicker of dismissal was bait enough. They followed her across the floor. The first rounds of the challenge were lighthearted. People took turns in the center circle, dancing solo or in pairs, showing off footwork, spins, and tricks. The crowd clapped and whistled, phones up, recording everything. Alyssa stayed on the sidelines, cheering for others waiting. Then Vince strutted into the circle, dragging Tommy with him. "Let's see what the pro can do," he called, jerking a thumb toward her. The crowd hooted, eager to see the teacher join in. She raised an eyebrow, stepped forward, and the DJ dropped a beat heavy with percussion. At first, she matched their energy light steps. A few playful spins, nothing serious. Tommy tried to mimic her moves, and failed miserably, earning laughter from the crowd. Vince moved closer, too close, his hand brushing her arm. She sidestepped smoothly, keeping the rhythm. The crowd thought it was all part of the act. Then Kyle joined in, circling behind her. She felt his presence before she saw him, the way the air shifted. Vince leaned in, pretending to correct her form, and his hand slid low against her hip again, just like last week. Her body moved on instinct. She planted her left foot, hooked her right leg behind Vince's knees, and swept hard. He hit the floor with a loud thud, air rushing from his lungs. The crowd gasped, then roared. Before Tommy could react, she spun, caught his arm, and twisted, dropping him to his knees with a smooth shoulder lock. Kyle lunged forward, and she pivoted into a low spin, catching his ankle and sending him sprawling onto the hardwood. Phones flashed. The music didn't stop. For a heartbeat, the three of them just lay there, stunned. The cocky grins wiped clean. Alyssa straightened, breathing, steady eyes sweeping the circle. "This is a dance studio," she said, voice carrying over the music, "not a hunting ground." The crowd erupted, half cheering, half laughing in disbelief. And Alyssa knew this was only the beginning. The noise was deafening. Phones were up in every direction, capturing the three men scrambling on the floor. Vince tried to push himself up first, groaning his backward cap, now somewhere across the room. Tommy's face was flushed crimson, not from exertion, but from the sudden awareness that the crowd was laughing at him, not with him. Kyle stayed down longer than the others, his pride clearly weighing more than the hit he'd taken. Alyssa didn't move from the center. She stood, tall, chest steady, eyes locked on them. Every inch of her posture told them she was in control. "You done?" she asked, her tone casual, like she was offering them an out. Vince snarled, "You think that was funny?" and took a step forward. She let him. Then before he could close the gap, she pivoted into a sharp side kick, not hard enough to break bone, but enough to knock him back a solid 2 steps. The crowd gasped again, then erupted into cheers. Tommy glanced at the people filming, and something in his expression cracked. This wasn't just a bad moment. It was a public humiliation that would outlive the night. He lunged, his swing clumsy and wild. Alyssa sidestepped, hooked her arm under his, and used his momentum to flip him onto his back. The floor trembled under the impact. Kyle finally stood, towering over her. "All right, enough," he muttered, trying to reassert himself, but his voice lacked conviction. He reached for her shoulder, an attempt at intimidation that came far too late. Alyssa ducked low, hooked her leg around his again, and swept. The big man's balance broke instantly, sending him crashing down, his hands slapping the floor to catch himself. Marcus cut the music, letting the sound of the crowd fill the room. Someone near the front shouted, "World star moment," and laughter rippled through the audience. Alyssa stepped back, giving them space to get up again. "If you want to dance," she said evenly, "you do it with respect. Otherwise, the door is right there." She nodded toward the entrance, the studio lights catching the steel in her eyes. The three men exchanged a glance, silent communication between predators who'd just been declawed. Vince's jaw clenched. Tommy muttered something under his breath. Kyle looked at the floor. One by one, they gathered what little dignity they had left and walked toward the door, the crowd parting to let them pass. Phones stayed raised the whole time, documenting their retreat. When the door closed behind them, the energy in the room shifted. Relief, pride, and a spark of awe rippled through the spectators. Marcus turned the music back on, but the beat was drowned out by people rushing up to Alyssa. Students hugging her, strangers praising her, and at least a dozen voices telling her the video would go viral by morning. She just smiled faintly, wiping sweat from her brow. This hadn't been about internet fame. It had been about drawing a line and making sure they and everyone else watching knew exactly where it stood. Still still deep down, she knew the video would spread. And with it, a message she wasn't the kind of woman you could corner without consequences. By morning, her phone was a battlefield of notifications, texts from friends, direct messages from strangers, and a flood of tags on social media. Clips of the takedown had already been edited into slow-motion reels set to dramatic music, or overlaid with captions like, "When the dance teacher knows martial arts," and "Brooklyn studio beatdown." Views were climbing into the hundreds of thousands before she even had her first cup of coffee. Alyssa sat at her kitchen table, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, watching the numbers tick upward. The comments ranged from praise to disbelief. "This is how you handle creeps. She's my new hero." That sweep was clean. Even a few local news outlets had messaged her asking for interviews. The studio that evening was packed again. But this time, it wasn't for an open challenge. It was for regular class. People she'd never met showed up at the door, eager to learn from the viral dance instructor. The energy was different. There was a quiet reverence in the way new students looked at her, a recognition that she wasn't just a teacher. She was someone who commanded respect. Midway through class, Marcus pulled her aside. "You should know," he said, lowering his voice. "Those three guys, word is they're not showing their faces around here anymore." "Guess you made your point." She didn't gloat. Instead, she nodded and got back to work, running her students through combinations, correcting form, and encouraging them with the same calm authority she always had. But under the surface, there was a deeper satisfaction, a quiet certainty that she'd done exactly what needed to be done. A few days later, she received an email from a young woman she didn't know. It was short, but heartfelt. "I saw your video. Something similar happened to me last year, and I froze. Watching you fight back made me want to learn how to defend myself. Thank you." Alyssa read it twice, then closed her laptop, leaning back in her chair. It hit her. Then this wasn't just about her personal revenge. This was about showing people, especially women, that they didn't have to accept humiliation as part of life. They could stand their ground. They could take back control. The following week, she added a new class to the schedule, Dance and Defense, a fusion of rhythm and martial arts, teaching students how to move, not just with style, but with strength. The first session sold out in less than an hour. On Friday night, as the studio lights glowed and music thumped through the speakers, Alyssa stood in the center of the floor once again. She scanned the crowd, students laughing, practicing, learning, and felt that same grounded steadiness she'd had the moment she swept Vince's legs out from under him. Only this time, there was no anger in her. Just purpose. The bullies had tried to make her small. Instead, they'd made her bigger than ever. Life has a way of testing your boundaries, and some people will push to see how far they can go. But strength isn't just in your fists or your legs. It's in your ability to stand firm when others expect you to break. Alyssa's story is a reminder that confidence without respect is arrogance, and arrogance falls fast. When faced with harassment, you don't always have to match force with force, but when you do, make it count. And most importantly, know that setting boundaries isn't just for you. It's for everyone who will follow your example.